I want my thing.
All right. So thank you all again for joining us tonight. Dr. Saul Scheinbach is Vice President of the Hudson River Audubon and has been writing their newsletter science column, Science Watch, for over 25 years. Tonight, he will talk about Hawaii, its eruptions and evolution, and how we can save the remarkable birds there. So without further ado, Dr. Saul Scheinbach.
Thanks, Aaron and Sandy, and thank you for allowing me to do this talk. I can see some of the faces out there. I'd rather see everybody in person, but got to do what we got to do. So tonight, as you can guess, I'm going to talk about Hawaii's birds. Hawaii is a unique place. It's fascinating to both geologists and evolutionary biologists. And birders like us are also lured there by its native birds. Tonight, I'm going to describe the interesting geology of Hawaii and also show you some of those birds. These wonderful birds evolved there and nowhere else, and I'm going to show you how that happened. You'll also learn about a crisis in Hawaii. Hawaii has more endangered species than any other state in the Union, and has received little funding for that. But as we'll see, that is changing. So let's go on with the geology. So the state of Hawaii is actually an archipelago consisting of 8 main islands. Hawaii, also called the Big Island. Maui, which you heard about in the news this summer, sadly, a huge fire there. I'm going to mention that later, but it has been a great vacation spot. Kahulaui, which for years was a U.S. bombing range. Shows you what we think of Hawaii. And now is a cultural site. Molokai, which once was a leper colony and now accepts limited tourism. Lanai and Niihau, which, believe it or not, are privately owned. Oahu, which has the capital, Honolulu, and Kauai, the northwesterly large island, which is a great vacation place. It has a wonderful tropical rainforest. And all of these, as well as over 100 tiny islands, atolls like Midway, which is midway between Hawaii and Japan, that's why it's called Midway, and seamounts, which haven't broken or which are below the ocean surface. All of this is caused by a hotspot below the Pacific plate. At this point, it's about 1,200 miles below the crust. It's pretty big. It's 300 miles wide, and it is responsible for all of the islands I just spoke about, because the Pacific plate is a tectonic plate, and it's moving in a northwesterly direction, and it's been doing that for millions of years. So in our plan, Kauai is the oldest island. It's about 5 million years old. And the Big Island, or Hawaii, is the youngest. It's sitting over the hotspot right now. It's less than 1 million years old. And as this plate creeps in a northwesterly direction, for about 4 inches per year, new islands are forming. And so in the southeast, there's a new island being formed as we speak, Loihi. It's got a name already. It's about 300 feet below the surface. And that's going to be real estate one day. So if you're going to be around in 500,000 years and you're a speculator, you might want to buy some of the newest U.S. property, Loihi. And as I said, this Pacific plate is moving in this direction, and it's been doing that for tens, probably 100 million years, at 4 inches per year. So those of us who are old enough to know what started World War II, well, Japan's going to get its wish. In about 60 million years, it's going to be butted up against Hawaii, because all of these islands will have moved to Asia, and they'll be up against Japan. Right now, all the volcanic activity is occurring on the Big Island. That's the news that you get all the time. And the Big Island consists of 5 different volcanoes. 2 of them are dormant. Kohala, which last erupted over 100,000 years ago, and Mauna Kea, which erupted about 5,000 years ago. And the other 3 are active. Although Hualalai hasn't erupted for about 200 years, so we don't know. All the activity you hear about comes from these 2 volcanoes, Mauna Loa, which last erupted just a year ago, and Kilauea, which is generally even more active, has been erupting through this year, and it last erupted in September of 2023. And between these 2, there have been eruptions every 2 to 3 years for the last 200 years, making Hawaii one of the most, excuse me, making Hawaii one of the most active volcanic areas on the planet. And this big island is at the latitude of Key West. So the answer to the trick question, which is the southernmost state in the Union, is Hawaii. That's the answer. Hawaii is the southernmost state in the Union because this southern tip is actually more southerly than Key West. Forget about Mount Everest. If you consider all of Mauna Kea, it's almost 20,000 feet below sea level, and the almost 14,000 feet above sea level. You get a mountain that's over 33,000 feet tall, over 4,000 feet taller than Mount Everest. So Mauna Kea is the tallest mountain on the planet, and its neighbor, Mauna Loa, is the most massive mountain on the planet. Okay, that's enough with the geology. Let's move on to evolution. Those of you who know me know I love to talk about evolution. I think it's important. People should understand it. And I also like to talk about my friend Charlie, except I missed the slide. Here we go. So we know that evolution leads to speciation, and islands are a great place to study that because they're physical barriers. Darwin began to understand that when he traveled to the Galapagos on that famous Beagle voyage. And he saw a lot of things there, and he cogitated for about 20 years, and he finally wrote this book, this famous book, one of the most famous books in the world. And what he said in that book was that barriers are very important because they separate what he called provinces. And once they get separated, they can go on to become new species. He didn't know anything about genetics, DNA, mutations. Nobody did. But now what we know is that once you get a group that's physically isolated from its parental group due to physical isolation, they go through mutations. Mutations are occurring all the time. Everybody, and us too. And over time, the mutations can accumulate in the isolated population such that they can no longer interbreed with the parental group. So that if you even brought them back together, they couldn't mate. And that's a definition of 2 species. They can't interbreed. So one species becomes 2. And a special kind of evolution often occurs on islands, and it's called adaptive radiation. Adaptive radiation occurs when a single line diversifies into many different species. And that kind of thing happened on the Galapagos. And that's what Darwin saw. Most people know about Darwin's finches. He made them famous, of course. They don't know much about what happened on Hawaii. This kind of adaptive radiation occurred on the Galapagos, which are 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. Hawaii is even more isolated. The closest landmass is North America, which is 2,400 miles away. Hawaii is the most isolated archipelago on the planet, and adaptive radiation occurred there too. Most of us don't know much about these birds. They're not in every biology textbook, and at least not when I studied biology. We learned about Darwin's finches. But what we know today is that adaptive radiation occurred on these islands too. And what DNA analysis tells us is that an ancestral line, the Asian rosefinch, somehow made its way to that northwesterly island, Kauai, about 5 million years ago, just when that island had formed. And they flourished there. And over the next millions of years, they island hopped as the new islands came up above the surface of the ocean. And what was so great about it for them was nobody was there. No mammals made it to the islands. No other birds made it to the islands. And so they had all the niches to themselves. And what do I mean by niche? Well, in biology, a niche is not just where something lives. It's the occupation of the species. It's everything that they do. It's what they eat, who they eat, when they eat it, how they eat it, when they're awake, when they're asleep, all their interactions with the living and non-living environment, the ecosystem. And so these birds had a field day, and they occupied all those niches that would have already been filled by different birds or other creatures that were on the mainland. Nobody was there. And so as a result, we end up with insect eaters, nectar feeders, fruit eaters, even a woodpecker. And the result is that we get this fantastic array of beaks and colors. As far as we know, the number changes, but right now we know that there are 18 species of Darwin's finches. By contrast, on Hawaii, we ended up with 56 species of honeycreepers evolved on Hawaii. And through adaptive radiation. And that adaptation, those adaptations demonstrate the power of evolution. It's a natural treasure, but sadly, only 17 of those species remain now because of human-caused pressures. Let's take a look at a few of these honeycreepers. Oh, I know. I wanted to get the, I'm sorry. Forgot about this slide. So all of these are endemic to Hawaii. And I want to get through that word because even I get confused by it sometimes. So we can talk about non-native species, where we brought the organisms somewhere. We had a role in it. And on Hawaii, we of course have livestock that people brought. We have rats, cats, the mongoose, mosquitoes, many plants, many other animals. Hawaii has over 5,000 non-native plant and animal species. Native refers to organisms that get to a place all by themselves. Nothing that we did, we're not involved. And we can divide that up into indigenous. Indigenous means they're naturally occurring, but they are also found elsewhere. So on Hawaii, we can find the black-crowned night heron, the northern shoveler, the American widgeon, a bunch of other birds, but all of them can be found elsewhere, mostly on the mainland. And so on North America. And so they are indigenous. But in terms of the honeycreepers, they are endemic. They are found nowhere else on the planet. They evolved on the Hawaiian Islands. So they are endemic. And of course, that's all natural. We had no hand in it, except to knock down the number of species. So let's take a look at a few of them. This is the Palila, and this is my photo taken on Mauna Kea, over 5,000 feet up. And this bird, you can see, he's got a wonderful finch-shaped beak, perfect for eating seeds. And that's what he eats. He eats the seeds from this tree that he's sitting in, the mamani tree, which is an endemic plant also. It's in the locust family. And he loves those seeds, even though they contain a toxic alkaloid that would kill everybody else. But he has evolved the ability to detoxify those seeds. He also eats the caterpillars that live on the tree. There are only about 1,000 of these birds. And this bird is listed as being critically endangered. Next, we're going to look at the apapani. Look at the difference. This bird has a quite different beak, a curved, slender, pointy beak. This is my shot, again, over 5,000 feet up in Mauna Kea. And this bird lives off of the ohia flowers, the open ohia flowers. This beak is perfect for that. And he has a brush-like tongue to lap up the nectar, the apapani. This is the only bird I'm going to show you tonight that is not endangered. There are about 1.5 million of these. And so they're not threatened in any way, at least right now. And talking about being threatened or endangered, I want to discuss these two groups for a couple of minutes. The Akeoloas and the Mamos. These two groups once formed 6 different species. The last Akeoloa was seen on Kauai in 1965. The last Mamo was seen in 1898. They're gone now. But you can see that these birds evolved these beautiful sickle-shaped beaks. And they did it through a process called coevolution. Coevolution occurs when 2 or more species reciprocally affect the evolution of each other. And that's what occurred on the islands. So many plants made it to the islands. One such group are called the lobelias. And they went through their own form of adaptive radiation. And on the islands, lobelias, some of the lobelias began to form these tubular, curved corollas, as opposed to their ancestors on the continent, which have these straight open corollas. And no bees made it to the islands. So these birds were their pollinators. And so that was their food. And it turns out that for the bird, it's best if the beak perfectly fits the flower, because then they don't use a lot of energy to get their food. But for the plant, that's not good. For the plant, it's best if the flower doesn't perfectly fit, so they have to jiggle the flower and get a lot of pollen on their head and pollinate more plants. So you can imagine that this constant tension between the birds and the plants over millions of years resulted in these wonderful sickle-shaped beaks and these extremely curved corollas. And I want to say something else about the plants. The lobelias are in trouble too. No herbivores made it to the islands until people brought them. And so plants on Hawaii, many of them became defenseless. So we have raspberries without thorns, nettleless nettles, mintless mint. And the lobelias are being gobbled up by all the herbivores we brought there. So their status, there are over 100 species, but many of these species are threatened or endangered. And as far as the honeycreepers, this is the last of the sickle-beaked honeycreepers, the Evie, or scarlet honeycreeper. Again, this is my shot over 5,000 feet, Mauna Kea. And this bird is more numerous than the others I showed you. There are 70,000 of these, but their numbers are declining, and so they're considered threatened. And you can see that his beak perfectly fits the indigenous lobelias, those flowers. But I told you that the lobelias are also declining. And so this bird has taken to, like the apapani, started feeding on the indigenous ohia trees, the open flowers of the ohia trees. And so who knows, if we come back in 250,000 years, his beak may be different if he's still around. And this is my all-time favorite honeycreeper, partly because I can pronounce the name. Akiapola'au is what he's called. And you can see that he once had a wonderful sickle-shaped beak, but no woodpeckers made it to the islands. So that niche was open. And over time, This bird took on the role, he occupied the niche of a woodpecker, specifically a sapsucker. He does what a sapsucker does. He look at this lower mandible. This lower mandible, which surely once was as curved as the other, turned short, stout, straight, and pointy, perfect for drilling holes. And that's what he does. He drills holes in trees, laps up the sap like a sapsucker, eats any insects that arrive. He also uses the upper mandible to probe and pull off bark to get grubs in the trees. He's a sapsucker, woodpecker, the only one on the island, the only indigenous one. And in order to drill those holes, it's probably the most interesting feeding mechanism for any bird. He has to move the upper mandible out of the way. You can see it better in this picture. He has to move that upper mandible. This is my shot again in the forest patches over 5,000 feet up in Mauna Kea. He has to move that upper mandible laterally in order to feed. It's pretty amazing. And the young stay with the parents for over a year, maybe because they have to learn how to do that. So let's review the threats that are faced by these birds. I've only shown you just a few, but you can already see that they are highly specialized in their diet and habitat. Think of that palila feeding off of one tree. And they were doing fine, but they won't do fine when exotic species arrive that are generalists and can eat everything. And that began to happen when Polynesians arrived from the Marquesas about 1,200 years ago. We begin to see habitat destruction right away. You can imagine they were farming, and so they would destroy patches of forest. But they also brought their pigs with them. And pigs, as you know, uproot soil. They can compact it too. They love to eat the native tree ferns, and they destroy huge swaths of the forest, and they cause erosion. People also brought cattle, and we all know what cattle do. And they had a ball because, as I said, most of these plants never experienced a herbivore. They had no defenses. They also brought goats. We were recently on the Big Island, and feral goats are everywhere, and they eat everything. People also brought rats. Rats love to eat birds' eggs. You know, the nene is the state bird of Hawaii, and I didn't check lately, but I do think I remember. I know it almost went extinct, and they had to save it in a captive program. And I think a major reason was it's a ground nesting goose, and rats were eating all of its eggs. Probably one of the worst things we did consciously was in 1883, the sugar growers were losing money to the rats. And so they had the bright idea of importing the mongoose. They didn't do their homework because the mongoose is diurnal. It feeds during the day. The rats are nocturnal. They feed at night. So the mongoose couldn't find too many rats to eat, but it certainly found the native birds. And it eats their eggs, their chicks, and their adults. So as a result, from all of this human-caused pressure, 39 of those original 56 species, honeycreepers, have gone extinct. And out of the remaining 17, 11 of them are endangered or threatened. 9 honeycreeper species have gone extinct just since the 1980s. When I first traveled to Hawaii 20 years ago, I brought my binoculars as a tourist, and I wandered around looking at many birds, and every bird that I keyed out came from somewhere else. Another state, another country. I didn't go to Hawaii to see northern cardinals, but they were there, or Java finches, or Asian miners. That's the birds that I saw. Not one native bird. You may have heard me say that the pictures I took are on the slopes of Mauna Kea, over 5,000 feet up. That's where I had to go to see these honeycreepers. And by the way, invasive species harm people too. we all heard about that big, huge, terrible fire on West Maui that killed over 100 people just this past August. Couldn't have happened without these exotic, non-native grasses that we brought from Africa. They love fire. Their seeds are fire resistant, and they are pioneers. They grow quickly on bare lava, and in the dry season, in the summer on Hawaii, they dry out. The fire liberates the seeds are fire resistant, and they can grow some more. Without all of this dried fuel, that fire would never have happened. So they don't talk about it much in the news. I saw it mentioned in a few stories. But if these grasses weren't on Hawaii, the town of Lahaina would not have been destroyed. But for the honey creeper, definitely, its worst enemy is the mosquito. I don't know how we got that picture. This picture is all over in Hawaii. There's a famous birder who takes a lot of pictures. But anyway, so imagine a tropical paradise without mosquitoes. That once was Hawaii. But the southern house mosquito arrived in 1826, probably in a water barrel on a ship. And 70 years later, the Asian tiger mosquito shows up. Both of these transmit human diseases like dengue and chikungunya and Zika. But this mosquito is a vector for avian malaria, transmits avian malaria to birds. Now that was okay because the parasite wasn't there. But in the 1940s, the parasite arrived, probably in an infected pigeon. Culex mosquito, the southern house mosquito, bites that pigeon, picks up the plasmodium parasite, and transmits it to another bird, and we're off. So we now have avian malaria on the islands. And it's akin to what happened in North America when the Europeans arrived, and they passed smallpox on to the Native Americans who had no immunity and dropped dead like flies. These birds, the Hawaiian honeycreepers, they've never seen this disease, and they have no immunity. Once bitten, they will certainly die within 9 days. And that's what happened, to the point where just 40 years later, by the 1970s, you could not find a honeycreeper below 5,000 feet on any island, because above 5,000 feet, it's too cold for the mosquitoes to live. However, we all know what's happening on the planet. We all know that the Earth is warming and the islands are warming too. And year by year, the mosquitoes are creeping up because the islands are warming. And pretty soon, the birds who are living here are going to run out of habitat that's free of mosquitoes. They have no place to go. So it is a crisis that we face today. These 4 endemic honeycreepers, 2 of them, each of these lives only on one island. These 2 live on Kauai. These 2 live on Maui. They're due to go extinct in the next 2 to 5 years. It's not a happy story, and we did it. But help is on the way. This group, Birds Not Mosquitoes, is a consortium of over a dozen state, federal agencies, including private conservation groups like the American Bird Conservancy and the Nature Conservancy. And they've been studying this problem for a number of years. And they have come up with what they think will greatly help the honeycreepers. What they say their objective is to achieve a landscape level of mosquito suppression. There's no way to get rid of the mosquitoes right now, but they can knock them down. And the way they're going to do it is they're going to use something called Wolbachia. What the heck is Wolbachia? Well, Wolbachia is a fascinating parasite that infects up to 3/4 of all the insect species worldwide. It's probably the most common parasite on the planet. And it lives in mosquitoes, and it's an obligate intracellular bacterium That means it can only grow within the cells of its host, can't grow outside. And it lives in as I say, it lives in all kinds of insect species, and it has subgroups depending upon its host. But what it does in all of these hosts is it has figured out how to best transmit itself to the next generation. It lives in the eggs of the female. It actually also lives in the male sperm, but those don't get transmitted. It lives in the egg cytoplasm, and so it's maternally inherited, and that's how it gets transmitted to the progeny of the next generation. And it has several strategies to favor infected females in the subsequent generations. So, for example, in wasps, it results in females that are parthenogenetic. That is, they don't need males anymore. Infected females make fertile eggs without any males. And that means that all the females in the next generation quickly become infected. In fruit flies, it does something called male killing. If a female who is infected, with Wolbachia, mates with a male that is not infected, she'll have progeny, but they'll all be females and they'll all be infected, no males. And in mosquitoes, it does something very interesting, something called cytoplasmic incompatibility. These are all fancy names, but mosquito species have different strains of Wolbachia. And if a female with one strain of Wolbachia mates with a male that contains another strain of Wolbachia, the cross is infertile. Nothing happens. And I'm going to show you this video to explain it.
Besides setting up mosquito traps and treating mosquito pools with BTI, there is an alternative option for large-scale mosquito control, and it's a bacteria, Wolbachia. This naturally occurring bacteria lives in symbiosis with many insect species, including Culex mosquitoes in Hawaii. Hawaii has several different strains of Wolbachia, and different strains are incompatible with one another. Meaning, if a male mosquito mates with a female with a different strain of Wolbachia, the resulting eggs will not be fertilized. Therefore, if lab-bred male Culex mosquitoes, which don't bite, were given a strain of Wolbachia, then were released into the wild and bred with wild females with a different strain of Wolbachia, no offspring would be produced, and the mosquito population would be significantly reduced within one generation. This phenomenon is already being implemented in Florida and California to help prevent the spread of other mosquito-transmitted diseases. Also, Wolbachia can only survive in insects and cannot transfer to other animals. Currently, the University of Hawaii and Department of Land and Natural Resources are researching this future opportunity, but will first need full government and public support.
Okay, so just to reiterate, out in the wild, for a mating to be fertile, to produce young, the male and the female mosquito have to contain the same strain of Wolbachia. If we transinfect males with a different strain of Wolbachia and release them, we flood the area with these males. The males don't bite, remember, and females only mate once. When they mate with this male, the cross will be infertile. The eggs get fertilized, but the egg can't divide. It stops dividing. And so no progeny is produced. And if we use this in the field, it has a special name. It's called the incompatible insect technique, or IIT. And as that video said, it's been used in, it said it was used in, I think, New York and California, but that's an old video. Since 2011, all these places around the world have been using IIT programs to knock down mosquitoes that cause human diseases. For example, in China, Wolbachia incompatible mosquitoes were released on 2 islands to knock down the mosquito that causes dengue, and they got a 90% reduction. In 2017, the EPA approved the use of this program in 20 different states in the US. So people in Kentucky can call up Mosquito Mate and buy a plan by which the company will come at set times and release incompatible Wolbachia mosquitoes. I think it's the Asian tiger, to knock down Zika. And this is not genetic engineering. And so far in all these years, no Franken mosquitoes have been produced. And so if we can do this to reduce human disease, we can do this to reduce bird disease. And that's the plan, to suppress the mosquitoes in Hawaii to allow the honeycreeper population to grow. There are already 2 different Wolbachia strains on the islands. One is in the Aedes mosquito, and the other one is in the Culex mosquito, the southern house mosquito, the one that causes malaria. The plan is, let's transinfect the Culex males with the Wolbachia from the Aedes mosquito and do an IIT. And here is the plan in detail. It's got a lot of stuff in here, but I'm going to go through it bit by bit with you. First of all, I want to say that this program received $14 million from the infrastructure bill. I doubt that the Republicans will mention that tonight in their debate. But that aside, the plan is we're going to take Culex embryos that are growing in a lab in California. First, we're going to cure them of their endogenous Wolbachia with antibiotics. The embryos are then transinfected with a strain of Wolbachia from the other mosquito. It's all done on an assembly line with micro injections. We don't want any females because then they can mate with the males. We have to get rid of them. And that's done with a 2-stage exclusion process. The female pupae are larger than the males, and so they can be sieved, mechanically removed, or we can use an artificial intelligence laser scanner to pinpoint them and knock them out, get them out. In the second stage, when the pupae hatch into adults, you probably know that the female antenna is different from the males, considerably so, easy to spot. And so again, AI imaging can get rid of any females. In previous plans, when this is used, the risk of a release of a female is less than 1 in 900 million, negligible. And this plan was done in a pilot form already on Maui. To save those 2 honeycreepers I mentioned just earlier, they started small-scale releases in and around Haleakala National Park in May. They wanted to see how far the trans-infected males would travel and how long they would live. And they found that those male mosquitoes lived a little longer, a little more than a week, a little longer than the local ones, but they didn't go very far. So they realized they had to have more release sites closer together to saturate the area. And my last point here is that large-scale releases will occur this month, right now, as I speak, to get a 90% reduction in the mosquito population. But I'm sad to say that that's not going to happen. Here is the plan in detail. Large-scale releases of about 250,000 male mosquitoes released by drone, maybe by helicopter, twice per week in these 65,000 acres. And the plan is on hold as of just 2 weeks ago. A group called Hawaii Unites went to a judge and got the judge to issue an injunction. I don't know why the judge issued an injunction. This project has gone through dozens of public meetings. People have been made aware of it. The state, the federal government, all of these agencies support it. Conservation groups support it. But somehow they convinced the judge to put a hold on the project. So we don't know where this is going to go. But I can tell you that I'm certainly unhappy about it. And I went to the website of Hawaii Unites. And as I suspected, their website is full of lies and scare tactics. So, for example, they say that all of the islands are being targeted with this corporate experiment. I love the wording that they use. It's not true. Right now, it's only being done on Maui. The hope is, if they get final approval, to do it on Kauai. It's not going to be done on all the islands. It'll be done where it's needed to save the honeycreepers. Oh, and they're going to build an insect lab in Hawaii. Well, there are no plans to do that. Or all of the lab-bred mosquitoes are bred in California. Oh, and they intend to use genetically modified CRISPR technology to make these mosquitoes. That's a complete lie. I already showed you how they're being done, but they can scare people when they say CRISPR. By the way, you may know, if you've been following, CRISPR has been approved to cure sickle cell anemia. How do you like that? In people. But they don't want to do it in mosquitoes. And okay, that's fine. It's not being done. And they're going to continue production and release in perpetuity. Well, that's a lie too. The plan is that this is temporary. It's a temporary holding process to give the honeycreepers more room to multiply, and hope that in the near future, we can come up with a plan to eliminate the mosquito. But nobody plans to do this forever. And as I said, there were dozens of public meetings around the islands, and these are some of the concerns that were raised by the public. I already went through some of them. So, for example, people were worried about releasing all these mosquitoes. Well, the male mosquitoes don't bite anybody. They feed off of nectar. They fly around playing their little harps, and they feed off of nectar. They don't bite anybody. Nothing foreign is being introduced. These two Wolbachia strains have been existing in these two mosquito species for over 100 years. And we already said, in the video said, that Wolbachia only lives in arthropods and can't be transferred to mammals, certainly not to humans. And this southern house mosquito, like all the mosquitoes on Hawaii, don't belong there. Even if we could remove them, which we would love to do, and hopefully one day we will, they won't be missed. They're not part of the ecosystem. They don't belong there. And certainly, the proposed use of IIT, this program, does not include genetic engineering, and so there will be no GMOs produced. And I'd like to end with this quote. Many of our native birds evolved in isolation for millions of years, and now their very existence is threatened by mosquitoes. These birds are already proven survivors, weathering a hurricane of human-caused threats like habitat loss and mammalian predators. They're at the end of their rope with the mosquitoes and avian malaria. We've got to do something before it's too late, and hopefully we will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saul. I'll be first to admit that I was not expecting mosquitoes to be part of the discussion tonight, and it's definitely making me, it's very thought-provoking. So Cindy H has said in the chat, awesome presentation. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask questions of Saul, please do.
Yeah, so the honey creepers that are in other countries like South America or wherever, are they related to the ones in
No. No, this is a completely independent group. They call them honey creepers, but they're not related. No.
I've got a question. So it's Ted here.
Yes.
I mean, that program to release those mosquitoes, I mean, they would have been breeding thousands of those mosquitoes, which only live a week or whatever it is. So, I mean, that's a huge expense when this injunction came down, huh?
Well, I haven't heard or seen any more news about what they're doing to I'm sure that they've gone to this judge and presented their case. As I told you, what you see on the website is just silly stuff.
Yeah.
But this is the era that we live in, when science is the enemy rather than the savior. And people think that all of these agencies are in some kind of conspiracy to destroy the Hawaiian Islands.
Yeah.
When I was there, I witnessed a talk given by somebody from Birds Not Mosquitoes. And a woman got up and constantly interrupted her and presented complete falsehoods from some advocate. And it was pretty sad. I've never seen that in a science presentation. What this woman was doing.
And just to clarify one point, I mean, you made the comment that you only see these birds above 5,000 feet, and you know, and now we've got global warming, so you know, all of that habitat is kind of shifting higher. But I guess the point about the 5,000 feet is really critically the mosquito. And so if you could get rid of the mosquito, these birds would start to move down slope. I mean, there'd be plenty of habitat for them to move into.
Exactly. That's the idea, to expand. I literally meant that, to give the birds room to breathe, to get rid of the mosquitoes and give them some room. That's the idea. It's a temporary fix. You know, you could talk about capture and a captive program and then release them, but that doesn't often work. The Hawaiian crow, which is indigenous to the Big Island, right now there are over 100 of those in captivity. The group that's doing that has tried to release them at least 2 times, I think 3, and they have failed. Utter failure, because the birds have lost their culture. They don't know how to eat. They don't know what to eat anymore. They don't know that the Hawaiian hawk is a predator that loves to eat them. And so their next step they've tried to do this over 5 years, can't do it. So they're going to release them on Maui, where the Hawaiian hawk doesn't live, and they're going to hope that they can survive there. So once we take a species in and make it a captive, that's a whole different ballgame. These birds still know how to survive if they're given a chance.
So with the mosquitoes, do they inject each individual mosquito with a little needle?
Yes.
Or how does that happen?
Well, it's an
Looks like
assembly
they were
line.
like literally with a syringe. That
Yes,
doesn't sound like it.
It's a tiny microscopic pipette, and they move them along. If you're interested, you can. I just read it the other day. There was a recent article in September in the New York Times. It's online. If you search Wolbachia, you're going to see a story, and you'll see a short video showing you how they inject them. And in that case, it's in Asia. They are using Wolbachia to inject the Aedes aegypti mosquito, because it blocks the viral parasite that causes hemorrhagic fever, I think it is, or dengue. I forgot the disease. So Wolbachia does all these strange things to its host, and they're trying to take advantage of this, again, in human-caused diseases. But there's a quick clip of about 5 seconds where they show you the pupae moving along in single row, and a little tiny microscopic glass pipette injects a drop into the pupae. Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Another question. So we always say one of the reasons we're losing billions of birds is the insect population is crashing due to all sorts of human things we do. And mosquitoes are insects, and I always do wonder a little bit, when we get the program to get rid of all the insects, are we taking some food away from birds? Does that,
Well,
do many birds eat mosquitoes? Is that a part of other birds?
Yes, I don't know which side to come down on that one. I think it would depend on exactly each case. For example, there are many species of mosquitoes in most areas, not just one. And right. if one is a vector for disease, I think we can get rid of that one and not really worry that the rest of them, which are not troubling us, would not be around to feed the birds. But certainly in this case, the mosquitoes have only been on the islands for 120 years, which is nothing. We're talking
Yeah,
about
nothing.
birds evolving over 5 million years, right? And so,
Right.
so 120 years is nothing. The mosquitoes mean nothing to them. And if we took, as I said earlier, if we got rid of all the species, right now, I think there are 5 or 6 species of mosquitoes on the island because of us. And if we got rid of all of them on the islands, nobody would miss them.
Okay.
I see there are more chats here. Let's see what I can see here. Show chat. Can I do it? Any questions? I don't know if I'm maneuvering this. Well, thank you, folks, for all the.
Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
The other question is it possible for these birds to eventually mutate enough so that they're immune to avian malaria?
Sure, but
that could take millions of years.
Yeah, exactly. You know, when I speak to some of my friends and they tell me that global warming occurred before, and the planet always goes warm and cold, sure, but this is happening in such fast. Global warming right now is happening so fast that species can't adapt. You know, when it happens over 500,000 or 1 million years, they have a chance. Look, here's the bit about evolution. People think that because a species needs something, it's going to get it. Well, you know, the truth is 99% of the species that ever existed on the planet are extinct because they didn't get something when they needed it. And that's what generally happens. It's just chance whether a mutation will occur that is favorable for the organism in a new environment. The great thing about Darwin's insight was that when that happens, even though he didn't know the mechanism, natural selection favors it. Natural selection favors that. And I think that's the most important thing to understand about evolution. I used to tell my students that we could take every infant when it's born and tie up one leg and make you hop around on one leg. You still wouldn't lose that one leg. A Russian scientist did that 100 years ago. He chopped off the tails of mice. And damn it, they just kept coming back with tails. The next generation always had tails. So the mutation has to arise. And that's the way the species can survive. And it takes time for that to happen. They could change their behavior much faster, like the apapani that I showed you. But again, think of the palila. The palila lives on one tree. One tree. It eats one type of seed, and that's it. It's a specialist. And if that tree goes, it's finished.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Are there any other questions?
There is Mary had asked a question in the chat. She says, what is happening to plant populations pollinated by birds which are going extinct?
Well, now there are insects on the island that are pollinating because we brought them too. I've seen bees on the islands. But again, look, how did I open this talk? Hawaii has more endangered species than any other state because it was so isolated and we brought all of these non-native creatures there. So the plants are in big trouble too. I'm not a plant expert, but I'm willing to bet you, again, that when you go there as a tourist, unless you go up 5,000 feet, you're going to see very few native plants. Those palm trees, they came from somewhere else. They're not native to Hawaii. Well, most of the plantings that I see around houses, if not all, came from somewhere else.
Well,
Anybody
thank you so
else?
much, Saul. I mean, there's a whole list of people saying, you know, it's fascinating, very interesting, great presentation, thank you for a wonderful and informative presentation. Fascinating. So thank you so
Thank you.
much. This was very informative, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share with
And
us
they have
tonight.
time to go see the Republican debate.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Thanks, Saul.
fantastic. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It was
Yeah.
fun.
Absolutely. Can't wait for you to come back next year with another topic.
Yes.
Well, we'll have to see what happens to this program. I hope the judge lets it go forward. I'm
That's
sure he will.
unbelievable, isn't it? Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it'll take
Okay.
time. Time is
Thank you so
important,
much.
but it'll
Good
take
night to
time. Okay,
everybody. Thanks for showing
good
up.
night, everyone.
Thank you so much.
All
Thank
right,
you very
wonderful.
much.
All right.